July 5, 1943. Dawn. The wheat fields south of Kursk tremble under the rumble of engines. Inside a cramped steel turret, Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Belayev wipes dust from the sight of his T-34. The air smells of hot oil and unwashed uniforms. Outside, artillery flashes flicker along the horizon like distant lightning. Operation Citadel has begun. Across the fields, the German armored spearhead is moving. At first, the Soviet crews expect the familiar silhouettes, boxy Panzer IVs, maybe the heavy Tigers they've heard whispers about. But through the early morning haze, Belayev notices something different rolling toward them. Low, wide, angular, new tank, the Loader mutters. Through the periscope, the shape becomes clearer. It's a Panther tank. But something strange is happening. The machine slows, jerks, then stops. Another behind it begins smoking from the engine deck. And then another. Soviet tankers stare in disbelief as several German vehicles simply halt in the middle of the advance, their crews climbing out in frustration. Belayev lets out a laugh. So this is the new German miracle. Word spreads quickly along the Soviet line. The Germans have brought a new tank to the battlefield, and it's breaking down before the fight even begins. Inside Soviet command vehicles, radio chatter crackles with amusement. Reports confirm what many are seeing: engines overheating, transmission failures, final drives shredding themselves before firing a single shot. Some German units are losing half their Panthers before reaching the front line. For Soviet tankers hardened by 2 brutal years of war, the moment feels almost absurd. They've heard the propaganda. Germany's unstoppable machines. Germany's engineering genius. Yet here they are, abandoned hulks scattered across the steppe. Belayev's gunner squints through the sight again. One Panther is still moving. Slowly, awkwardly, but moving. The Soviet commander shrugs. Let it come. His 76mm gun has killed plenty of German tanks before. The distance closes. 800 meters. 600. The Soviet gunner steadies the crosshair over the Panther's hull. Fire. The T-34 recoils violently as the shell slams into the German tank. Through the smoke, the crew waits for the familiar result. Sparks, fire, the sudden stillness of a dead vehicle. Instead, the Panther keeps coming. The shell has bounced. Inside the turret, the Soviet crew exchange confused looks. Belayev leans closer to the sight. The German tank stops. Its turret begins to turn. Slowly, deliberately. The barrel is longer than anything Belayev has seen before. Much longer. For a brief second, the battlefield grows strangely quiet. Then the Panther fires. The sound is different, sharper, faster, almost like the crack of lightning. The Soviet crew never hears the impact. The shell slices clean through the T-34's front armor from nearly a kilometer away. The turret fills with sparks and smoke. Outside, another Soviet tank erupts in flames. And suddenly, no one is laughing anymore. Because the tank that was breaking down across the fields of Kursk has just revealed something terrifying. Its gun can kill from a distance Soviet crews have never fought at before. And this is only the beginning. Far behind the front lines, German engineers are already racing to fix the Panther's flaws. When they succeed, the battlefield will change. And Soviet tankers will soon discover that the tank they mocked this morning may become one of the most dangerous machines they have ever faced. The flames from Belayev's destroyed T-34 rise into the pale morning sky. Across the wheat fields outside Kursk, Soviet tank crews are suddenly confronting something they have never faced before: distance. For 2 years on the Eastern Front, tank battles have been brutal, chaotic affairs fought at shockingly close range. Often 300 meters, sometimes less. Crews spot each other through dust, smoke, and burning wrecks. Whoever fires first usually wins. But the German tank now rolling forward, the new Panther tank, is changing that equation. Its long 75mm kilowatt K-42L-70 cannon is built for one purpose: killing from far away. German Commander Oberleutnant Hans von Lorchit, leading Panthers of Panzer Regiment 39, peers through his optics. His tank has already survived the chaos of the opening advance, something many others have not. The problems are real. Engines overheating, fuel pumps failing, transmissions cracking under stress. Before the battle even began, dozens of Panthers had broken down along the march routes toward the front. Mechanics worked frantically through the night trying to keep them moving. But the ones that did reach the battlefield were something else entirely. Von Lochet spots movement in the distance. Soviet armor. T-34s cresting a low ridge line nearly 1,500 meters away. He steadies the sight. Inside the Panther's turret, the gunner adjusts elevation carefully. The optics are crisp, magnified far beyond what most Soviet crews are used to. Target. T-34. 1,400 meters. The loader slides a long armor-piercing shell into the breech. Ready. Von Lochet pauses for just a moment. At this range, many Soviet tanks believe they are safe. The Panther fires. The shell crosses the field in less than 2 seconds. Through the scope, the German crew sees the T-34 erupt in sparks as the round punches through its armor. A direct kill. The Soviet formation halts. They were not expecting fire from that distance. Inside several T-34s, commanders shout confused orders. Their own guns struggle to penetrate Panther armor beyond 500 to 700 meters, especially against the sharply sloped frontal plate. Soviet tankers now face a terrifying problem. The enemy can kill them before they can even return effective fire. Another Panther fires. Another T-34 explodes. Across the battlefield, Soviet crews scramble for cover behind shallow ridges, tree lines, and burnt-out vehicles. For the first time, the German tankers are controlling the range of the fight. It is exactly how the Panther was designed to operate. Back in Germany, engineers had studied the deadly encounters of 1941, when Soviet T-34s shocked German crews with sloped armor and wide tracks. The response was ambitious: build a new tank that could outgun and outrange the Soviet designs. The result was the Panther. Its armor sloped sharply like the T-34s, but thicker. Its gun longer, faster, more precise. And when it works properly, devastating. But the battlefield around Kursk still tells a complicated story. Many Panthers remain stranded behind the lines, victims of mechanical failures. Some units report losing over half their tanks before reaching combat. German mechanics are fighting their own war, one fought with wrenches and spare parts. Meanwhile, the Panthers that are operational continue firing across the open ground. Another Soviet tank burns. Then another. Inside Soviet command posts, reports begin flooding in. A new German tank is destroying T-34s at ranges they've rarely experienced before. At first, commanders struggle to believe it. Some assume the reports are exaggerated battlefield confusion. But then reconnaissance units bring back clearer descriptions. Long barrel, wide hull, distinctive sloped armor. The name begins appearing in field reports. Panther. And with every passing hour, Soviet tankers are learning a harsh lesson. The early breakdowns they laughed at were real. But the weapon hidden inside the Panther's turret is changing the battlefield in ways no one expected. By nightfall, dozens of burning tanks dot the fields around Kursk. And Soviet commanders are beginning to understand something unsettling. If Germany can fix the Panther's mechanical flaws, this tank could become a nightmare across the entire Eastern Front. Because today, at Kursk, Soviet crews have just experienced the first glimpse of its true power. But the real turning point is still coming. Night falls over the battered fields near Kursk. The battlefield grows quiet. Burning wrecks flicker across the dark steppe, Soviet and German alike. The smell of scorched fuel drifts through the cooling air as recovery teams creep forward to pull damaged machines away from the front line. But several kilometers behind the German positions, another battle is underway. This one isn't fought with guns. It's fought with wrenches, grease, and desperate engineers. Rows of crippled Panther tanks sit in the darkness like wounded animals. Some have thrown their transmissions. Others have seized engines. A few have final drives shattered by the sheer strain of their powerful drivetrain. Mechanics from Panzer Regiment 39 crawl beneath the massive hulls under the glow of shielded lamps. Oberfeldwebel Karl Mattens, a veteran maintenance chief, wipes sweat and oil from his hands. This machine is brilliant, he mutters to a young mechanic beside him. Too brilliant. The Panther is powerful, perhaps too powerful for its own design. Its engine produces tremendous horsepower. Its wide tracks allow excellent mobility across mud and snow. Its armor slopes at sharp angles that deflect incoming rounds. But the drivetrain, the gears, bearings, and transmission components transferring that power to the tracks, is under enormous stress. And many of them are failing. Tonight, Mertens and his crew are racing against time. Because every Panther they can repair before dawn could change the next day's fighting. German engineers have already begun identifying the weaknesses. Overheating fuel pumps. Fragile final drives. Transmission components wearing out far too quickly under battlefield conditions. The Panther was rushed into combat before all these problems were solved. Now the soldiers are paying the price. But slowly, the fixes begin. Improvised reinforcements. Adjusted maintenance routines. Replacement parts arriving from rear depots. One by one, engines roll back to life in the darkness. Steel beasts returning to the fight. Inside one repaired Panther, its commander climbs into the turret and peers through the sight. Even at night, he can see the long silhouette of the gun extending forward like a spear. The 75mm WWII 42 LG-70. One of the most powerful anti-tank guns mounted on any medium tank of the war. At 2,900 feet per second, its armor-piercing rounds leave the barrel faster than most Soviet crews realize until it's too late. When the Panther works, it dominates long-range combat. German commanders know this. That's why they are willing to endure the mechanical headaches. Because every operational Panther on the battlefield can change the outcome of a tank engagement. Far across the lines, Soviet crews are beginning their own night work. In repair yards behind the front, damaged T-34 tanks are being patched together under dim lamps. Crews talk quietly while mechanics weld armor plates and replace damaged components. The conversation keeps returning to the same topic. The new German tank. Some describe shells hitting from distances they never imagined. Others describe rounds bouncing harmlessly off the Panther's sloped front armor. One commander finally says what many are thinking. If they bring more of those tomorrow. He doesn't finish the sentence. No one needs him to. Because Soviet doctrine has always relied on aggression, closing the distance, swarming enemy armor, overwhelming it with numbers and mobility. But the Panther changes that. It wants to fight far away, where its gun is strongest, where Soviet guns struggle. And if German engineers succeed in keeping more Panthers running, the next battles could become far more dangerous for Soviet tank crews. By early morning, dozens of repaired Panthers stand ready again. Engines rumble. Tracks grind against the earth. German tank commanders climb into their vehicles, adjusting headsets and checking their optics. Some of the tanks that broke down yesterday are now returning to the battlefield. And this time, they are coming prepared. Across the Eastern Front, the Panther is about to enter a new phase of the war. Not as the unreliable machine Soviet crews laughed at, but as a long-range predator that will reshape how armored battles are fought. And the next encounter will prove just how deadly that transformation can be. Autumn, 1943. Morning fog hangs low over the forests near Orel. A column of Soviet armor pushes cautiously along a muddy road. At the front, Captain Sergei Mikhailov stands half-exposed in the open hatch of his T-34, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The summer battles around Kursk have changed things. Everyone knows it. The Germans are retreating in places. Yes, but their new tanks are appearing more often. Reports from reconnaissance units mention the same machine again and again. The Panther. Mikhailov lowers his binoculars and scans the distant tree line. At first, he sees nothing. Just mist. Then something shifts. A dark shape moves between the trees. Low. Wide. Long gun. His stomach tightens. Panther, he says quietly into the radio. The column halts instantly. Inside the turret, the gunner swings the sight toward the forest edge. But the distance is uncomfortable. Nearly 1,200 meters. For most Soviet tank guns of 1943, that's pushing the limit of effective combat. But the Panther doesn't share that problem. Far across the clearing, Inside a concealed position, a German commander steadies his optics. The Panther crews have learned their lessons. Don't rush. Don't expose the weak sides. Fight from range. Use the gun. The commander's name is Lieutenant Dietrich Keller, a veteran of the Eastern Front. His Panther is dug slightly behind a ridge, the turret barely visible above the terrain. Perfect ambush ground. Through the sight, Keller watches the Soviet tanks. 10 of them, maybe more behind the hill. He speaks calmly. Range: 1,250 meters. The gunner adjusts the elevation wheel carefully. The Panther's optics magnify the battlefield with frightening clarity. Even through the fog, the Soviet tanks are visible. Large silhouettes against the gray field. The loader locks the shell into the breech. Ready. Keller waits. A Soviet tank begins creeping forward again. He gives the order. Fire. The Panther's gun cracks sharply. Across the clearing, Mikhailov hears the sound, but it's different from the usual boom of artillery or tank fire. Sharper. Faster. Then the tank beside him explodes. The shell has punched through its turret at a range the Soviet crews barely believed possible. Flames erupt instantly. Mikhailov shouts into the radio. Contact. Long range. Panther. The Soviet column spreads out, scrambling for cover behind ridges and shallow depressions in the earth. Another shot rings out. Another T-34 burns. The Panther is firing from a distance where Soviet guns struggle to respond. Inside Keller's turret, the crew works with mechanical precision. Load. Aim. Fire. Each shot feels deliberate, controlled, calculated. This is exactly how the Panther was meant to fight. Not charging forward like the WWII. Not trading blows at close range, but killing from a distance where its gun dominates the battlefield. Soviet tanks begin firing back, but many of their shells either fall short or ricochet harmlessly from the Panther's sharply sloped frontal armor. Mikhailov feels frustration rising. His tanks are powerful, mobile machines, but in this moment, they feel suddenly vulnerable. He realizes something important. This isn't the chaotic, close-range brawling Soviet crews are used to. This is something different. The Germans are controlling the geometry of the battlefield, stretching the distance, forcing Soviet tanks to advance across open ground under precise long-range fire. Another Soviet tank erupts in flames. Mikhailov slams his hatch shut. Forward, he orders. The only solution is the one Soviet tankers know best. Close the distance. Charge. The T-34 engines roar as the remaining tanks surge across the field toward the hidden Panther. Inside Keller's turret, the German commander watches the advancing Soviet armor carefully. They are coming fast now. Very fast. The range begins shrinking. 1,000 meters. 800 meters. At this distance, the Soviet guns become far more dangerous. Keller knows the moment is approaching when the advantage will shift. But he also knows something else. His Panther has already destroyed multiple enemy tanks before they could fire effectively. That's the difference. That's the new reality. Even if the Soviets close the distance, they are arriving with fewer tanks than they started with. And on the Eastern Front, numbers often decide everything. But the Soviets are not standing still. Even now, far behind the lines, engineers and commanders are already working on an answer. A new gun. A new tank. Something capable of meeting the Panther on equal terms. And when that answer arrives, the balance of the armored war will shift again. Winter, 1944. Snow sweeps across the frozen plains outside Kharkiv. A column of Soviet tanks moves through the white haze, engines rumbling beneath layers of ice and mud. Inside the lead vehicle, Lieutenant Ivan Sokolov leans into the gun sight of a new machine. It still feels strange to him. The turret is larger than the one he trained in. The recoil of the gun is heavier. And the shell the loader lifts into the breech is noticeably bigger. This isn't the familiar wartime workhorse, the T-34 that has carried Soviet armor across thousands of kilometers of brutal combat. This is its new evolution, the T-34-85. And it exists for one reason: the Panther. Soviet commanders learned quickly from the encounters of 1943. Reports from the front described the same terrifying problem again and again, German tanks destroying T-34s from ranges where Soviet guns struggled to penetrate. The long-barreled gun of the Panther tank had changed the geometry of armored warfare. So Soviet engineers responded the only way they knew how. They made the gun bigger. The T-34-85 mounts an 85mm cannon, capable of penetrating Panther armor at more realistic battlefield ranges. It isn't perfect, no tank ever is, but it gives Soviet crews something they desperately need: a fighting chance. Inside Sokolov's turret, the loader slams the heavy round into the breech. The gunner adjusts the elevation wheel slowly. Through the optic, dark shapes move along a distant ridge. German armor. The familiar silhouette appears again. Low hull, wide tracks, long gun, Panthers. Even after months of war, the sight still sends a ripple of tension through Soviet crews. The German tank has proven itself dangerous when used correctly. But this time, something is different. Sokolov speaks quietly into the radio. Panthers spotted. Range 900 meters. In 1943, that distance would have been uncomfortable. Now it feels manageable. The Soviet column spreads out across the snowy terrain, engines growling as they search for firing positions. Across the ridge, German Commander Hauptmann Franz Becker studies the approaching formation through his Panther's optics. He has seen these new Soviet tanks before. Bigger turret, different gun. He knows what that means. The Soviets have adapted. His gunner steadies the sight. Range: 1,000 meters. The Panther fires first. The shell streaks across the frozen field and slams into the front armor of a T-34-85. The tank shudders violently, smoke spilling from the impact point. But the Soviet vehicle keeps moving. Inside Becker's turret, the crew exchange quick glances. That shot might have destroyed an earlier T-34. This one survives. Then the Soviet gun fires. The 85mm shell smashes into the Panther's side armor as Becker's tank shifts position. The impact sends a violent jolt through the German turret. Metal shrieks. For the first time in months, the Panther crew feels something new. Vulnerability. The battlefield has changed again. Both sides now possess machines capable of destroying each other at increasingly dangerous distances. The duel continues. Shells streak across the frozen landscape. Tanks burn on both sides. But the Panther still holds one critical advantage. Its gun remains exceptionally accurate and powerful at long range. Even as the Soviets improve their machines, German crews continue exploiting the Panther's strengths whenever terrain allows. Open fields, long sight lines, carefully chosen ambush positions. And as the war stretches into 1944, the Panther begins appearing in larger numbers across the Eastern Front. Its early mechanical failures are slowly being corrected. Its crews are becoming more experienced. And despite the Soviet response, the Panther is evolving into something the Red Army must respect. No longer a machine to laugh at, but one of the most formidable tanks Germany will field during the war. Yet even as both sides build deadlier machines, a larger truth is quietly emerging across the Eastern Front. Because in the end, the outcome of the armored war may depend on something far bigger than any single tank. Something the Germans are beginning to run out of. January 1945. Snow drifts across the shattered countryside near Vistula River. The war has changed again. Inside a battered Panther tank, Lieutenant Karl Brenner adjusts his headset and scans the horizon through fogged optics. His crew sits in tense silence, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. It's not German artillery. The sound is coming from the east. The massive Soviet winter offensive has begun. Columns of armor and infantry are pouring westward toward Germany itself. Somewhere beyond the snow-covered forests, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Soviet tanks are moving forward. Many of them now the newer T-34-85. Brenner exhales slowly. 2 years ago, when he first heard rumors of the Panther, the idea seemed unstoppable. A perfectly balanced machine, thick sloped armor, wide tracks for mobility, and one of the most powerful tank guns of the war. On the battlefield, the Panther had proven itself capable of extraordinary things. It could destroy Soviet tanks from well over a kilometer away. Its frontal armor could deflect many enemy rounds. When positioned correctly, a single Panther could dominate an entire stretch of terrain. And yet, Brenner looks around at the landscape. The war no longer resembles the early years. Back then, German armored units moved in confident spearheads. Now they fight desperate, delaying actions. Behind Brenner's position, the road is filled with retreating trucks, damaged vehicles, and exhausted infantry. Fuel is scarce. Spare parts even scarcer. Some Panthers in nearby units are already abandoned simply because they cannot be repaired. The machine itself is still powerful, but the system supporting it is collapsing. Brenner spots movement in the distance. Through the scope, dark shapes emerge from the snowfall. Soviet tanks. More than he can easily count. The radio crackles with urgent voices from nearby German units. Enemy armor advancing, large formation. Prepare to engage. Inside the Panther's turret, Brenner's gunner steadies the crossbow on the lead tank. Range: 1,300 meters. The loader slides an armor-piercing shell into the breach. Even now, this late in the war, the Panther's gun remains deadly. Fire. The cannon cracks. Across the field, a Soviet tank erupts in flames. Another round. Another hit. The Panther still fights like the predator it was designed to be. But this time the battlefield doesn't feel the same. Because the Soviet tanks keep coming. Dozens of them. Maybe more beyond the ridge. The Red Army has built tens of thousands of tanks during the war. Factories far beyond the reach of German bombers continue producing machines at staggering speed. Meanwhile, Germany struggles to replace its losses. Each Panther destroyed now represents something difficult to recover. Skilled crews. Precious fuel. Scarce steel. The Soviet column spreads across the snowy fields, advancing despite the burning wrecks. Another Panther somewhere to Brenner's left opens fire. Then another. German guns are still lethal. But the numbers are overwhelming. Inside the turret, Brenner suddenly understands something that many commanders across Germany are beginning to realize. The Panther solved the battlefield problem. It became one of the most dangerous tanks of the war. But it arrived too late, and in too small numbers, to change the final outcome. Outside, Soviet tanks continue pushing forward through the smoke and snow. The distance closes. 1,000 meters. 800 meters. Soon, the battle will become the kind of brutal close-range fight that favors numbers and momentum. Brenner grips the turret hatch for a moment. 2 years ago, Soviet tankers laughed when the Panther first appeared at Kursk. They saw broken machines and stalled engines. What they didn't realize then was that the tank itself would become one of the most formidable weapons of the war. A machine capable of changing the way armored battles were fought. But by 1945, the lesson had come full circle. Because even the most powerful tank cannot win a war alone. And as the Soviet advance rolls westward, the final chapter of the Panther, and the war itself, is rapidly approaching.